Thank you. Is this on? Thank you to Emily for letting us take over the rare books room at the Strand, and this is a really dangerous place. I've spent more in this room than I have on like shoes and clothes and restaurants and apartments, I think, combined. So if you want to hang out, they have really exciting stuff here afterwards. So I'm very excited to celebrate the publication of the Bosnia List with some of my favorite editors and agents and authors, and so I thought what I would do is, as I'm introducing everybody, let's talk about like the most exciting latest stuff going on, just to like get us rolling. So over there, the first man over there is Dan Jones, who all my students know because he's the editor of the infamous Modern Love column at the New York Times, and he's bought tons of my students' pieces, including Liza, who I think launched her book with a Modern Love column. And Dan recently launched his own book, Love Illuminated, and every time I go on the website or TV, he's on TV. In fact, he was on Katie Couric, and I think my students are following you all over the country. I'm getting Seattle and LA. I'm getting yeah, and you're going to Miami next, right?
Right.
Okay, so tell us how it's going.
Oh, that's the first question?
Well, with
How's
the book
it going?
tour. What's the latest with the book tour?
The latest with the book tour here tonight. Going to Miami on Saturday. And I guess after that, I'm just going to book and author events in Richmond, Virginia, and Charleston, South Carolina, and Detroit, Annapolis, Minneapolis,
and ASJA. We're gonna do events there.
The ASJA conference. When is that?
April 26th.
April 26th.
Wait, in the press. So I've seen you in. So it's New York Times and the Atlantic and Time Magazine, and they either love you or they're really pissed that you're happily married. Right? Is that what's?
I don't know how they infer that I'm happily married from I mean,
it's the bathtub scene in your book.
I have a pretty good marriage.
The bathtub scene in your book, I think.
Okay.
Okay, right next to Dan is Liza Monroy, who is one of my favorite students, who then immediately had the nerve to get a bigger book deal from a better house than I did for her first novel. And but actually, then I needed somebody. I had a paperback original, and I wanted to do a big event in Michigan. So I said to Liza, "You have a big hardcover from Random House, so why don't you come with me and do a Michigan event?" So she did. She felt obligated enough. So that was your first novel, Mexican High. And Liza has since moved to San Francisco, but she's back in town for the launch of her new book, which is a memoir called The Marriage Act, right? And am I correct in that started with a Modern Love?
It did. It was a Modern Love column that I had sent to Dan after one of your courses in 2005, I believe it was.
And it was how I married my best friend to get a green card.
Yeah, and how it was really ultimately about love. And defining marriage and such. But yeah, at the time I was sure, okay, I'm going to send it and it's going to be rejected and, that'll be okay. And it was my first accepted essay to a major outlet. So,
and then you recently did one I loved about the profiler, which was how your mother worked for the FBI, and unfortunately she would go on Facebook and see the guys you were dating and profile them and tell you to stop seeing them.
Yeah, she would know in 5 minutes what it took me 2 or 3 years to come to understand. But that was also, I think I'm developing this pattern of writing a Modern Love column and then immediately wanting to turn it into a book. So that's what I'm working on now.
And hilariously, you did a reading where your mother read with you. She read the parts of the mother in your latest book. And then I saw you guys on TV together.
Yeah, yeah, we did we were on a TV show, kind of like a morning show news style in Portland, Oregon, and we decided that at my readings, when I read a funny scene that she was in, which at the time she was being, very asking my friend how he was staying in the country and possibly unpacking, our situation, she now pops up to read her dialogue, which it's funny, and it also shows that she's come to a place of acceptance, which is her arc in the book.
Good. Now, Kirby Kim was the William Morris literary agent who sold the Bosnia List, and he has big news. So why don't you tell us your latest? He moved.
I don't know how big this is, but I moved jobs. I'm at a boutique agency called Janklow and Nesbitt now, and I just started 2 weeks ago. So I'm still.
And are you still doing fiction and nonfiction?
Yep, pretty much the same. Probably a few less e-news hosts and things of that nature as a result of not being in the larger agency, but pretty much the same.
And young adult is your specialty still?
I wouldn't say that. I'd probably just say general commercial fiction along with some literary fiction and at least some narrative nonfiction as well. In pop culture, I do a lot of music and comedy.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Okay, and next to Kirby, we have another great agent, Kim Perel. And Kim not only agents books, but she also recently did her own anthology called Wedding Cake for Breakfast, and she included, me and Liza both have pieces in there. And she's at Wendy Sherman Agency, and the most exciting news that I've heard from there is that one of my former students, Claire Bidwell Smith, had a great memoir called The Rules of Inheritance, and I just heard that Jennifer Lawrence optioned it. So pretty good. And then I heard that another student of mine, Kara Richardson Whitley, you sold her book Gorge.
Yeah.
So tell us about that, or about what else is going on at your agency.
Yeah, I'm really excited about Kara's book, and I always say Sue is like the connector. She's like the Kevin Bacon of publishing. It's like 6 degrees of Sue. Because I met Liza. I got into publishing because I took a class that Liza taught, and Sue was Liza's mentor, and just the whole thing. And that's how I got into publishing. And then now I've sold Sue's, and then they were in my anthology and everything like that. So I'm really excited for Kara's book. It's coming out next year, and it's a memoir of her hiking Mount Kilimanjaro. And at 300 pounds, she was the biggest person to ever hike Mount Kilimanjaro.
Didn't she had Fat Woman on the Mountain was her
Fat
website.
Woman on the Mountain was her website. But now it's been compromised. Someone hijacked Fat Woman on the Mountain, so she doesn't have, I don't know if she has that anymore. It was hacked or something, I think. Someone else wanted to be the Fat Woman on the Mountain. So,
and you do fiction and nonfiction also?
I do fiction and nonfiction, and so exciting stuff happened at the agency is we've our book Z is on the bestseller list right now, and then we had one of our other authors was on the show Vice on HBO this week on Junkyard Planet about scrap metal in China, and yeah.
Great, and next to me is Danielle Perez, who's one of my favorite people in the world because she bought my first 3 books, including 5 Men Who Broke My Heart. And I remember after she bought the book, I hadn't met her, but we were planning a dinner, and I remember when I sat down, I said to her, this is the best blind date I've ever been on, because I already love you, you already know my whole life story, and you're already supporting me. And so Danielle was at Random House, and she, there's a seat here, and you can take if you want. And then she switched to go to NAL, and the big news, which a lot of you know, is it's an imprint of Penguin, and so Penguin recently merged with Random House, so I think you're at the biggest publisher in the world. And I know that I've sent her people, some great authors who she's published, including Beth Bernstein, who's here, who did a fantastic memoir last year called My Charmed Life. And we gave her a book party with candy necklaces and candy rings. Anyway, so tell us what else is going on with NAL and with your list. Any new exciting books out?
Well, from NAL, we do a pretty wide variety of commercial fiction and nonfiction, and I also do fiction and nonfiction. Upcoming, I do a lot of women's fiction, kind of book club fiction, suspense. March, we just published a book called Pack Up the Moon by Rachel Heron, which is a debut women's fiction book, which I am in love with, and she's a really wonderful writer. It's getting really great reviews. But I do a pretty wide variety of the fiction and the nonfiction, including memoir and narrative nonfiction and some pop culture and humor as well on the nonfiction side.
Great, and next to me is my co-author Kenan Trebincevic of the Bosnia List, which just came out, and he actually had bronchitis, and he has been losing his voice because they sent him on a book tour all over the country in Bosnian enclaves, and I think he, luckily when you give him a microphone, he gets his voice back, luckily, and you actually have some, actually have good news recently. You want to share it?
Yeah, Susan and I are having New York Times book review next Sunday, and
full page,
very positive.
Wait, and I'm jumping up and down out of my mind, and he is manically depressed. Do you want to explain?
Because I was walking back from work across the street.
Wait, so let's give a little bit about your book, Bosnia List.
Bosnia List. It's a memoir about how my Bosnian Muslim family survived ethnic cleansing when I was 12 years old in 1992, and how as a 31-year-old, 20 years later, I go back not only to reconnect with my family, but to confront neighbors and friends who wanted us dead. So last week I was crossing the street reading the preview of the review, I stopped middle of the road. I remember I was getting hit by a cab, and I said, what? The phrase that irked me was, Trebincevic eventually forgives. And it's like one phrase you're not using in our culture.
He said, picture an Auschwitz survivor where they forgive the Nazis. So and so then we get another piece that comes out, and 5 times they use the word forgive and forgiveness. So it seems as if it's haunting you.
Susan's like, shut the hell up. 200,000 books get printed every year, only 1,000 make it to the New York Times. So I'm finally getting over it. It's been a week.
Anyway, so I said that should be the worst thing that ever happens to you. Anyway, so just to have fun and start, just get right into the panel. I want to talk about, we all have exciting things going on that we're going to show off about, but as everybody knows, publishing is in the pits right now. It's really difficult. There's less newspaper pages. There's less magazine pages. Everybody's complaining. So I want to tell the truth, because it's not always, the easiest, and you really have to, you have to be very, you have to persevere. You have to really have a tough skin. So I want to let's talk about the truth about some of the down moments. So I want to admit to one of my down moments was, I remember I was just turning 30, and I was doing this book column for Newsday, and I got fired unceremoniously from the syndicated book column that I loved, just as this guy that I was in love with and thought I was going to marry totally dumped me. And then I had a student who not only got a book deal, got a $500,000 book deal. So I was completely freaking out and depressed. Luckily I had a great shrink, and it took a bunch of therapy, and actually one of the things that my shrink said, thank God, was that I was just like, this is the best job I've ever had at Newsday, and I'm reviewing 5 books a week, and I don't know what I'm going to do. And he's like, well, you're reviewing a lot of other people's books. Didn't you kind of tell me that you wanted to write your own book? So it was kind of this like great aha moment where I went from like the lowest to like, oh my God, maybe there's still hope. And definitely there was still hope. Anyway, so Dan Jones speaks to a lot of my classes, and one of the things that everybody loves that you talk about is that you were a slacker. You always admitted you were a slacker at 30, and you were a ski bum, and you didn't quite know what you were going to do. So could you tell us a little bit? It wasn't just like you got out of college and got this great job at the New York Times. So could you tell us a little bit about what happened between after college, before you got to the Times?
Sure. My microphone is drooping.
It's a slacker.
Your mic is a slacker.
Okay, so the quick version of my life story, I guess, is that I'm a younger brother who didn't really even talk until I was 5, and my brother spoke on my behalf, and that began my late blooming and underachieving lifestyle. I went to school at University of Virginia, decided I wanted to be a writer, but didn't really know how to do that, and decided to go out west and teach skiing in Park City, Utah for a couple of years, which I did, and then decided to go to graduate school for an MFA at the University of Arizona, which was fantastic. And in those days, you spent a lot of time in graduate school. Now they try to get you in and out fast. But I spent about 3.5 years there. Then met my wife there, who had come from New York, where she was in the magazine editing world. And we moved back to New York together, where at almost the age of 30, I started at the bottom of the New York editorial ladder as an assistant editor at Stage Bill, which doesn't exist anymore and was bought by Playbill. But this was out of Lincoln Center and Carnegie Hall, and I was earning $18,000 along with recent college graduates, and felt like I really better get my act together here. I went on to a series of nonprofit communications jobs in the city. We had 1 child and then a 2nd child on the way, and I hadn't been writing for years, and figured I'd really better get to it before the son was born, and gave myself until his birthday, which was about 7 months away, to finish a novel I'd started about 8 years before. And finished most of it. Finished the rest after he was born, and got an agent and sold it. And it didn't change my life monetarily, but it did psychologically, to have this book published and to have an agent. We left the city then because we had 2 little kids and couldn't afford it. Moved to Northampton, Massachusetts. My wife for a variety of reasons that had to do with the temporary rockiness of our relationship. Edited a book called The Bitch in the House, which was women venting their frustrations, often at their husbands. It backed me into the corner of having to respond with The Bastard on the Couch, which was men's befuddlement at their wives' dissatisfaction. And those two books together, especially edited by husband and wife, got a lot of attention. And one of the people who paid attention was Trip Gabriel, who was the founding editor of the Sunday Style section. He wanted to have material like that in Sunday Styles on a weekly basis if we could manage it, bi-weekly basis if that was the best we could do, and he wanted to hire us as a couple to do it. We lasted as a couple doing it for a couple of months, and my wife backed out and left me holding the bag. And this was in October of 2004, coming up on 10 years ago.
I love that you said that your marriage wasn't going to remain so great if you both tried to work together all the time, that only one of you could do the column.
It wasn't a two-person job, and it was a distracting job. And we worried it would become a competitive job if we were both doing it. So, yeah, she bailed.
Okay, Liza, I remember you telling me that, okay, so you got this big hardcover novel deal from Random House, and I know from my experience that you always feel like, oh, now I'm all set, and then I remember like a year or two later, it was like back to the drawing board, and what do I do? Should I be teaching, and should I go back to school? So was that a letdown? Was it frustrating to have to, after such a big book and a tour and everything, to have to sort of start over in a way?
Well, I really learned, I think, that lesson of that they say, like, well, each book is like a different baby, and each one, like the same way, like the first child will be nothing like the second child and everything, that the same very much applies to books, and that each one, it's not like, oh, I wrote one novel and had it published by a great house and got a great advance, and so now it's just going to be that way forever. And my agent at that time had warned me too. She said, coming out of the gate, like, you should just know for the future that this is a very unusual experience that you're having. So just know that. And at the time, I was, I think, 25, 26, and I was like, oh, whatever, it's just always going to be like this. This is just how it is. Like, this is great. And so then I started to write the follow-up, which was The Marriage Act. I thought, I think there's a book there. And I started to turn it into a book, and it proceeded to be rejected by every major publisher under the guise of that it wasn't a commercial enough of a story. And at the time, I was really only seeing it as a romantic comedy, as like a girl whose mother works for the State Department preventing immigration fraud, marries her gay best friend who's Middle Eastern for his green card to keep him in the country. So I was like, wait, to me, that sounds like Hollywood high concept. And I was saying like, oh, it's Will and Grace on steroids. Like, why don't you guys get it? But that actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise in a way, because when I couldn't sell the book immediately, I ended up going to an MFA program at Columbia for nonfiction writing, where one of my professors told me, yes, this is funny and you write funny, but like, do you realize that what's underneath this is actually a very serious issue? And that kind of set off a light switch for me, in that, oh, right, like, this isn't just, yeah, there's some capers and it can be funny and everything, but I need to use that humor to really dig at deeper questions, like gender-neutral marriage rights in the context of immigration, and what is marriage and how should it be defined for these purposes, and these kinds of things. And so I think going through that program and continuing in Sue's workshops and everything, and just working on it in a deeper way than I originally was when I was younger and more cavalier, helped make it into the book that it then became. That was, yes, there's still the humor and everything, but it's much deeper than what I was originally going for.
No never means no, it means revise it and try another editor.
Yeah, and then I was lucky in that my agent she's wonderful, and she would never give up on something that I was that passionate about, and so she would go through round after round, and we landed with Counterpoint with Dan Smetanka, who just ended up being a wonderful editor for the project, who really brought out the best in it, even after that. So overall, the process took, I think it was somewhere between 6 and 8 years, whereas my first novel took 1 year. So it was definitely a process of learning and growth, and in between the ages of 25 and now 34, it's just a huge time. Like, it was a lot of change and a lot of growth. So I feel like it was for the best for me as a writer in the end.
Good. And Kirby, I remember, I think you told me you were a lawyer on the West Coast, and I know you've been at a bunch of agencies, so do you admit to any periods of frustration with business or different jobs?
No, everything's gone awesome. Yeah, I think that I actually never practiced. I was in law school, and I decided very early on I didn't want to be a lawyer, and I remember thinking very naively that this would be a good transition, using the skills I learned there. And I remember thinking distinctly, like, I like to read and I know what I like. This shouldn't be too hard, right? And lo and behold, I remember going in and having this 5-year plan when I got here. I was like, I'm going to start selling books after 2 years, and then I'm going to have a list, and then I'm going to move back west. And I'm here 10 years later, and I'm still working on this list, and just really kind of figuring it out. Just in the last couple of years. Have you been affected by the problems in the business? Because obviously, even in the last 15 years, it's changed a lot. I mean, I think the main thing is there's a lack of diversity on the buying side. I mean, at least as I'm feeling it. All the mergers lead to less buyers, less different kinds of people buying the books, I think. I mean, if we just talk racially, it's like a pretty homogenous world out there in publishing. That continues to be an issue. So there's a lot of frustration there. And I think after 2008 really is when things changed drastically, for me at least. Yeah.
Okay, and Kim, you were telling me you did your MFA at the New School, and that before you landed in publishing that you had you were at Forbes.
Yeah,
tell us about. You had a funny story about.
Now you're going to tell that story because I told it to you before. Yeah, that was my first job out of college was actually with Forbes magazine. I always wanted to work in magazine publishing, and I was working for Steve Forbes and for the VP, and it was a really interesting job. It was very exciting. We went on the yacht and hot air ballooning and stuff, and he totally had Fabergé egg collections and stuff like that. And people would smoke cigars on the roof at 5, and I was no way in any way part of that world, or asked to be part of that world, or treated like I was part of that world. So I was never really gonna go anywhere there, but it was an amazing experience. So the story I told to Sue earlier, because she was asking what was one of your biggest professional disasters, and this was kind of I remember it because it was so early on in my working life, and there was a Christmas party that's very kind of small and exclusive and expensive that just a few people were invited to. I was supposed to send out an email, and I accidentally sent the email out company-wide, and it was to over 1,000 people, and it was supposed to be this, and then so I didn't know what to do, so I panicked, and I was dating the art director at the time, which was frowned upon, and I wrote an email to him saying how I just screwed up, but I sent that email to everybody. I didn't get fired immediately after. We ended up having the party with all the people because I sent out another email saying I rescind your invitation and you're actually not invited, and then I was told that you can't do that either. So everyone had to come. We had this amazing party and they ended up having a blue smokeism. It was great. I went out with a bang at Forbes because that was one of my last weeks there. But it was a really good learning experience. And then actually, after I left Forbes, it wasn't it was the grand finale. It was after a series of we would have to run after the mail truck. I'd forget things all the time. So it was not the best job for me, but fun. And then that's when I took Liza's class with Media Bistro, because I kind of didn't know what my next steps were, and I knew I wanted to do something with more creative writing. And Liza was an amazing teacher, and Sue taught her, and she kind of got me really excited about publishing and about books, and that's when I met a group of really great people that I'm still friends with to this day. Actually, I invited some of them. They couldn't come, but I still talk to them all. And we we continued a writing group, which was kind of my support. You know, I freelanced and things during that time, and then I went to the New School for the MFA program, and we all went to different MFA programs. And while I was in the New School, I started interning. I just applied to one Craigslist ad for intern at a agency, and I interviewed like the next day and got the job a couple days later, which was crazy, and I've been there ever since. And that was that's at Wendy Sherman, and that was 5 years ago. And I started assisting, then becoming an agent, and
better job than Forbes anyway.
Much better, much better. There's only 2 of us, so I can't do that company-wide email thing accidentally. I can do it to editors though, so I'm very careful. But that's kind of my story.
So Danielle, I remember you were working at Random House for a long time, and then there was a huge shakeup at Random House. Was that a difficult time in your career? Because I remember a lot of people that you had worked with. Everything got changed.
Yeah, that was the infamous year of 2008 that Kirby, I think, spoke of, where there was, of course, the great economic downfall that happened around the world, and it certainly hit publishing very hard as well, and there were tons of layoffs and conglomerations and stuff that happened. So that was a very hard time where a lot of the people you worked with weren't there anymore. So that was a very tough time in publishing. I think Kirby is right. That was kind of one of the turning points where things had been kind of pretty good for a while, and that really anybody who was spending their extra discretionary cash was holding on to it much more closely and was not spending it on books as much, and that really has continued into this day. So that's kind of what we're fighting against for the past 6 years. And TV and Hulu and Netflix and streaming and all the other things that people do that are grabbing at everybody's time, including ours. You know, we watch TV, we do those things too, but we also read. So I think it is, it's just, we're all just trying to grab for people's time and attention now, and it's much more difficult.
And Ken and I remember that we can talk about this, and Dan's actually great about, there's a lot of people, including Liza and Kenan, who launched their books with one essay. And I always say, like, 3 pages can change your life, because you could publish a great essay and agents and editors could actually be interested in your book deal. And I remember Kenan, the first 3 pages he ever wrote, he was my physical therapist, and whole funny story, but the first 3 pages he ever wrote wound up in the New York Times Magazine and the International Herald Tribune, and got picked up in the Best American Travel Writing Essay. But similar to Liza, like, I think he sort of thought he was all set. And if I remember, the second essay was, selling a second piece was hard. So do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, the first one took 3 weeks, and the second one took 5 months and 11 rejections. I remember Susan would come in for therapy, and I would tell her, I think they want my kidney. Like, I don't know what else to do. 11 rejections, and she kept saying, is there anything timely? Going on Bosnia, I said, leave me alone, there's nothing timely, makes no sense for this essay. And then finally...
It was a new, tell them about the piece Marshall.
Oh, the piece is one that Kirby was interested in. That's how I met Kirby at book seminar. It was about a Yugoslavian-themed lounge in Astoria that was meant to bring all different factions together through music and food. And 8 months into it, we almost killed each other, so the place closed. And that's
so he'd written this piece, and I kept saying, is there anything timely? Because one of the things that newspaper magazine editors constantly are saying in my classes is if you can get a timely lead, sometimes that'll help. And so I kept saying to Kenan every time, isn't there anything timely?
I kept saying no, and at one point I was reading my brother's email, like muttering to myself. She's like, what's going on? I said, well, my brother just emailed me an article about Bosnia. She said, what is it? I said, oh, it's the 20th anniversary of the war. She said, when? I said, it's Thursday. And it was Tuesday, and she like flipped out. So just by adding that one sentence about the anniversary, actually, it was picked up like 2 days later by New York Times op-ed.
What was great was that he, out of 11 rejections, a whole bunch of them were from the New York Times, but what's so exciting is there are really about 15 editors who buy essays at the New York Times who don't know each other. So actually you got your first, your first fantasy was to get in the New York Times. And actually, didn't that, when you came to my book seminar, and you told Kirby was interested in the piece,
exactly.
And also Colin Harrison
was there, and he said, if you ever write a book, that should be the first chapter.
So that wound up the first chapter that sort of launched the book. So that was good. All right, so I have a lot of students here, so let's get to the nitty-gritty that everybody wants to know. So Dan Jones, when you submit a piece to the New York Times Modern Love column, you usually write between 15 and 1,700 words, and you send it to modernlove@newyorktimes.com, and Dan is one of the few editors I've ever met who actually not only reads everything, but also doesn't give a shit who you know or what your connections are, what your past is. He either loves your piece or he doesn't love your piece. And so there's been many students of mine who've never published a piece before that have just broken in to get a half page in the style section with Modern Love. But there's been a little change lately, which is normally Dan used to say to people that it would take, you would say 6 weeks before you would get back to people. And why don't you give everybody the bad news right now? How long is it going to take now if somebody sends you a piece?
Yeah, I've been pretty consistent over the years of getting back within a month or two to people who submit. This book tour, I underestimated what a book tour is. And I underestimated what book promotion is these days, which is so much on the author's shoulders. Every interview is sort of done as a Q&A where you're writing mini essays all the time. And anyway, the book tour turned into a much bigger deal and a much bigger time consuming deal than I was expecting. So I have not read essays in my inbox in about 2 months. And anyone, I'm sure there are people in this crowd have essays that they submitted to me. I think I just got past essays that were submitted during the Christmas vacation. So we're going back to late December is what my backlog is, and the total number is about 1,000. And I don't know when I'm going to dig myself out of this hole, but I will.
So if somebody sent you a piece now, they should probably wait a couple months.
I actually posted on my Facebook page, which a surprising number of people follow, because I post something there and I hear back right away about people responding to it. Of not to submit. A few weeks ago I said, do not submit now. It's just adding to my backlog, and wait until after April 15th. Even later than that would be better. It's just, your piece is not going to get attention. I'm looking to reject essays. I'm still looking for good essays, but I'm looking to get out from under. So when I have that many, I just can't read as fast.
And luckily, like I said, there are a good 14 other editors I know from the New York Times who are faster. So so you can email me. I'm giving out info. You can email me if anyone's freaking out. But so by the summer, you're probably going to catch up, we think, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll be caught up by mid-May or so.
Okay,
that's the prediction.
Great. All right, so Liza, since you teach and since you've done 2 books now, could we get the nitty-gritty now? Like, I'm under the impression if you want to sell a novel, you have to write the entire novel, which is normally 200 to 300 pages. But if you want to write, when you wrote your book, the memoir, I personally write the entire memoir, but some people do it with a proposal. Did you write your whole memoir, or did you do it with a proposal?
Well, I was your student, so I wrote the whole thing. But beyond that, I just feel more comfortable having the whole thing, because then I know what it is. I know how best to explain it, how to write the synopsis that agents seem to now ask, the authors, can you write a synopsis of your own book to help with their workload, and also because presumably you're the person most familiar with it. So just being able to say, I know for a fact what this is. I like to do the whole thing first.
And it must have helped that you had the Modern Love, and I know you did a piece in Psychology Today. Mm-hmm. So the fact that you had short clips explaining the story, I bet that helped, right?
Yeah, and Kim's anthology, and another anthology that Rebecca Walker edited. I just put everything into a little packet and just try to make my agent's job as easy as possible when it comes time to submit it. Just put together every clip, any article about the story, bio, website, everything, just anything to make it as easy as possible for the editor to see, okay, this is what it is, this is who this person is, just to make their lives as easy as possible so that you have increase your chances of
And I also remember you did something interesting, which was her first book was a novel, but even though it was a novel, I remember you sold a piece to the New York Times, you sold several short pieces, and I remember we did an event with your book editor at Random House, and she said the fact that a novelist could sell nonfiction essays on a similar topic, that was part of the reason I wanted to go with her, because it's so rare that a novelist can also write short nonfiction. So would you say that if somebody wanted to launch a book, sometimes a short piece is a great way to start it?
Definitely, yeah. Short essays that are tied into the subject, even short stories in the better known of the literary journals have been known to catch editor attention. I think anything that gets your name out. Yeah, I know Cindy Spiegel, the editor of my first novel, had said she'd seen that I wrote a Lives column like that came out the week before she received the novel on submission. So I think just seeing that, you know, the author's name is out there. I was fresh in her mind at the time, even though the article had nothing to do with the subject of the book.
It was a little bit, because it was about your father, and the father was a subject.
Right, like the missing father was a thing, but it wasn't a direct translation. The novel was definitely a vastly fictionalized version of it, but I think just seeing that, okay, this person can be published and is getting bylines and things.
Great. And Kirby, do you agree that in general that when people come to you, they want you to be their agent, do you agree that if it's a first novel from someone not well known, that they almost always have to write the whole thing, but if it's nonfiction, they can write a proposal?
Yeah, that's right.
Can you tell us what kind of proposal do you want to see? Like what, you know, like specifics of what would be in it?
Yeah, I mean, I think proposals, you know, there's general guidelines for a proposal, and then you break the rules depending on what kind of story you're trying to tell. So one of them, I mean, you generally have a few pages of overview, which is kind of like your pitch of what the book's about, why it's important or why people are going to be interested, why you're the right person to write it, you know, maybe what other books you're using as comps and comparisons. You know, you have like a table of contents or perhaps like a narrative outline that's a few pages, and then you have perhaps a marketing section, you have a bio, you have a few sample chapters.
And do you agree that clips helps? Like, for example, I know with the Bosnia List, the fact that Kenan sent you clips early on, did that help you see the story?
Yeah, I mean, for nonfiction in particular, it really helps to have, you know, a sense of the writer's like platform. You know, you hear this all the time, and I'm sure Danielle will say the same thing, is that, you know, we do want to know that you know, this is part of your pitch also, is saying, I'm the right person to write this. And if you have covered it in the past, you know, like a music journalist writing, you know, Nirvana's, you know, oral history, I mean, that makes sense, right? So that's the kind of thing you want to include. I don't know if you necessarily need to like scan and send clips right off. You can just kind of say that, you know, you've been published here and there. But obviously you want to see your career as a writer, like as in you're building kind of a resume here. So all the stuff that Sue encourages her writers to do, which is publish these small pieces in different venues, is really important. And then to also remember that even leading up to publication, you should be doing the same stuff. When I have writers who have books coming out, you know, even with us, I mean, it was great working on this, on the Bosnia List with Sue and Kenan, because they understood that, you know, when the manuscript was done, their job wasn't over as writers. They kept writing pieces and getting them placed right up until publication. So yeah.
Good. And Kim, tell us about an anthology, because I always thought it'd be really fun to do an anthology, but people say that it's tough because you not only have to come up with an idea, do you have to, and I heard that you not only need the list of authors that will contribute to your anthology, but do you have to get people to write pieces in order to sell the anthology, or do you just need a list of names of people that would, like if you have some well-known authors that would commit?
Okay, so we talked about that. This would be a good question, because I have done an anthology, and we talked about that. But the way this anthology came about was so weird that I don't know, because this came about because I had this idea, and this editor, and Wendy knew that this editor had a similar kind of idea. So we had lunch, and we decided to do this anthology together. So all I needed to do was, you know, get a good roster of names signed on in order for them to give me the green light in that particular
some well-known authors.
scenario.
You had to get some well-known authors that would commit to an essay.
Yeah, well-known authors who would commit to an essay, you know, a certain number of kind of, you know, New York Times bestsellers, things like that, in order for them to greenlight it. And really it's about, so I would think that it's really about the names of the people who are, it's the big idea, the idea that resonates with the publishing house, but also the names of the people who are willing to participate. So it's really putting together, and we didn't have everyone. We had maybe, I don't know, 10 of the contributors when we sold it. So it was very loose, kind of.
Great. And Danielle, just to explain to people in the audience who might not know, in general, when you're at Random House or Penguin, you don't really necessarily want authors coming to you. You would prefer authors first they go to an agent, and then an agent most of the time would approach you with either a proposal or a book. Is that the way it normally works now?
Yeah, generally editors already have so many submissions from agents that generally they don't look at unsolicited projects, because we already have tons and tons of stuff from agents that have already sort of been curated and are presented in the best possible light already. And I think it always helps an author to have an agent anyway who's a little bit subjective and kind of step back from the material, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, and help you shape it so it's in the best possible shape before it's sent out to editors, acquiring editors at houses. So having a really good agent is the first step too on the road, I think. And I just wanted to speak about anthologies too, actually, because I did an anthology also with the Wendy Sherman Agency, which just has one.
Which anthology?
Well, I'm just going to say. I'm going to just say so in a second, because it has one of the best titles ever. It's called "I'm Not the Biggest Bitch in This Relationship." Not the bitch.
Yeah, which is also a great title.
Also a great title, but this was about dogs. It was about people and their relationships with dogs. And cutest cover too. Look it up online. Absolutely adorable. And that, I think, was sent in with a list of a lot of big name people who were very passionate about their animals, and a couple of essays that were already written, I think. But
and we had the book party where people brought their dogs.
Yes.
Oh my God.
I brought my dog to the book party. It was really fun. Yeah.
And do you agree that for a novel, you basically have to see the whole thing, but for a nonfiction book, you will look at a proposal?
Yeah, definitely for novels, unless an author has a track record and has written before, or maybe I'm familiar with them, because I do buy even partial. I buy novels even on partial, but the author has to have a track record, or I'm familiar with them, or some other reason, or they're moving from another house or something like that. But if they're a brand new debut author, yes, you really want to see that they can carry out the whole arc of a story, and your boss will want to see that as well in a book. And for nonfiction, I'm maybe one of the rare ones, or rare a little bit to Sue, but I actually prefer for nonfiction buying on proposal, particularly memoir and other sorts of narrative, as long as there's a really good table of contents and a really good arc where I can see where the whole story is going and where the themes are in the nonfiction, because then I feel like it can help an author shape it in the nonfiction world as well. So I actually prefer proposal and good sample material, and of course a platform for nonfiction.
Although I remember two of my students whose projects you liked, they came to you and they didn't have that many sample pages, so they only had like 10 or 20 sample pages. And I remember in two cases you said to me, I really like this project, but I need a lot more. I want a real meaty several chapters, sample chapters. So do you feel sometimes that you don't get enough meat, or you don't get enough pages?
Yeah, I think you definitely need to be sending in a good chunk of, at least 75 pages, a good chunk, so that an editor can really see what your writing is over a few different themes, and not just 10 or 15 pages. Or it's surprising if you get something that has that little sample material, because it's really not going to give you enough of a sense unless you're, I don't know, Kim Kardashian or somebody who's selling a book, and then you don't even need to write anything down.
Okay, and I remember Kenan, when we were talking about writing a book, he looked at me like I was crazy, because English isn't his first language, and he's a physical therapist. And I remember very early on that you said you could write 3 pages, you could write short pieces. And could you talk about the benefit of even though maybe overall you had a bigger book idea, what's the benefit of writing short pieces and selling them first?
Well, other than creating a platform, it structured the book chapters. Each piece we ended up extrapolating into long chapters. So it gave us also like a path and arc to the whole book. In the process of doing it, after publishing the second piece, I already had agents contacting me inquiring whether I had a memoir in mind. And there was, like, I think, a radio gig I had after the second essay. And we just kept writing before we even approached anyone. And luckily Kirby embraced the project, and I think we gave him about 110, 20 pages with the arc, synopsis, table of contents.
And I remember that you were skeptical that anyone would even be interested in Bosnia in America. And so was there a sense that you didn't even know if someone was interested, but all of a sudden being able to sell a piece to the New York Times Magazine and to the Wall Street Journal, like, did that give you confidence to keep going? The fact that every time you sent pieces out that you were able to sell them, did that make you feel like, well, maybe there is an audience for this?
Well, also, Susan always stressed out that editors like unusual voices. And that's what gave me like strength just to keep writing about the subject. Because I didn't really think anyone really cared about Bosnia anymore. It's like 20 years later. And I started getting emails from strangers and like especially Americans. And they gave me just confidence to just keep writing.
And what was that? Kenan always said that he held grudges and that this was 20 years later. And I remember we talked about that, and when you met Wendy Wolf, remember that she was the vice president of Penguin, who in charge of nonfiction. You remember what she said to you after she read your piece?
Yeah, we were Knickerbockers after she read the proposal. She said, the reason I like your book is the fact that you were able to hold grudges for so long. She said, she was so good at holding grudges herself that she even held them on behalf of others.
So that's when you knew you were in good hands.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one or two more questions, then we're going to open it up. So I want to know, since I'm a teacher and I've done this myself for 32 years, what are we doing wrong? Like, tell the truth. What should we never do? And Dan, actually, you had a funny story that sometimes that people that submit work to you, you say no, and they inappropriately email you their response to being upset. So that's obviously a no-no, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the danger of email and the danger of acting on impulse. But it happens rarely enough that I remember it really well when it happens. But it's always a sort of form of self-sabotage. There was a very funny one that happened more recently where the rejection note went back to the person, and I put everyone's name on them. Like, actually, I put time and thought and care. And went back to this person, and she forwarded the note to her mother, and somehow the mother responded to me, but addressed it to her daughter, and it said, well, I really liked it. Fuck the New York Times. Mom. It wasn't your mother.
And I hear that editors remember people that like that guy that sent you back an email that said lame. You said you remember the people who are obnoxious.
Yeah, it really. I mean, most people are so gracious and appreciative. I mean, I used to send stuff out all the time and never heard back, and that's the worst. You want to know. So yeah, it happens rarely. It's usually men. And one person said, really sort of threatened me and said, you're going to regret this, and my career will prove that to you.
So as a rule, not only don't respond to a rejection, but also could you tell us some other things that would just get on your nerves that people shouldn't do? Probably you don't really want people following up with you, especially after a few weeks, right?
The first would be a long cover letter. Very, very short cover letter. I often skip them anyway, but I'd like to get some sense of who the person is, but I'm not interested in all the places you published or the books you published or the writing programs and all of that. Just who you are, where you live, why you've written this piece maybe. Never give away anything in the story. Let the story tell itself. A surprising number of people say this is the story of how I met my husband, but that turns out to be a surprise twist in the end. An editor needs to be surprised just like a reader does. Don't give away any of your story in the cover letter. And in terms of following up, I think some editors don't mind if people follow up. With me, it becomes sort of annoying because I can't respond to all the people. I do my best to respond to the essays themselves, and the follow-ups. Like I don't think essays hardly ever get lost on their way by email. I think that almost never.
And actually,
happens. It's almost always
the New York
there.
Times, right? You get a bounce back
acknowledging it and providing guidelines and all of that. So I just have to. For me, it's like someone poking you. And if you do it politely, that's fine. I probably won't respond to it because I want to spend my time, again, reading essays and responding to essays. So the follow-up just isn't that useful, I guess. I'll get to it eventually.
Good. Well, Liza, as a freelance writer yourself, and also you're a teacher, and I know that you helped a lot of people get published, what are the mistakes that you're seeing? What are your students doing wrong?
Yeah, definitely the long cover letter, just explaining a whole history of the piece, or everything that they've ever done or written before. Not necessary. I think focusing on having a really strong lead is very important. Like, editors are, as Dan said, he has a lot of submissions and is reading through a lot of things all the time. You have to grab them right away. So if I see a slow lead or something that's kind of vague or general going in, I'll ask them to rewrite it.
Also, I know, because we were in the writing group together, you would never send out a first draft, right? You would always show it to the writing group, or people in your class would bring it and they would rewrite several times before sending it in,
especially
right?
Not the piece that you finish at 2 in the morning when you're feeling like it's just the most brilliant thing ever and you have to send it right then because it's just perfect now. Just sleep on it. And then go back and revise. Always show it to someone. I'll at least have 2 readers look at everything and incorporate feedback, because a lot of times just fresh eyes can catch things that you can't, especially personal material that you're so close to. A lot of times we assume there's a disconnect between what we think is on the page and what's actually on the page, and more so than critique, just like addressing what's missing can come really helpfully from
an objective
reader.
You're a teacher, so obviously a class helps, and I know you do classes online, and I know that you did a writing group. Is there anything else, like have you ever used ghost editors? Because I swear by ghost editors, where I sometimes will pay a former editor or an agent to go through my material and kill it and line edit before I send it out.
I think if you can invest in something like that, it can be a good idea. I haven't done that myself, just because I feel like I've had really strong readers in writing groups and just individual readers who we trade pieces and are very brutally honest with each other.
Would you say that being open to criticism and being willing to rewrite, if people can do that, then they get published more often?
Yeah, and you want to learn just to listen to that inner voice of your own too when it comes to feedback. Just because you get a ton of feedback doesn't mean take every feedback point by point and incorporate it into your piece. If you'll hear feedback where you say just yes, like that is completely resonant, that's going to help make this piece so much better. And if a piece of feedback doesn't spark that, if you feel kind of like, oh, I'm not sure, like that doesn't feel right to me, then that may be, you want to learn to filter like what to take in and what to discount.
Great. And Kirby, what kind of mistakes are you seeing from people that are sending you either their whole books or, oh, and by the way, if you don't mind, go through the process. You don't really want someone to send you a whole book. You want a letter first of somebody introducing it and saying, would you be willing to look at my project?
Yeah, generally with unsolicited stuff, I would rather just start with a cover letter. Sometimes people call. That's a really big mistake, I think. Just because you want to approach somebody the right way, I think. The things that I see in the cover letter, a long cover letter is definitely a mistake. You want to be able to pitch your book. Typos. I mean, that's obvious, but you'd be surprised how many typos come through, and kind of as soon as I see a couple, I just delete it. Because if they're doing that with that important of a first impression, then you can just imagine what the novel or the manuscript looks like. I'd say a lot of times sending things too early, just not fully baked. And that has to do with getting readers to really be brutal on your work, to make sure that you've done everything possible. And I get these weird cover letters sometimes where people say, I just finished it, here it is. And I'm just like, yeah, that makes me really want to read this. So I'd say those 2 things. And then the other one, I'd say just do your research. And that goes to, knowing how to pitch your book and knowing where it fits in the marketplace, and then also knowing who you're sending it out to. I've gotten a lot of romance queries, and I've never done a romance novel in my life. Things like that.
Can somebody go to your website, or is there a way to hear which agents are interested in what kind of books?
Yeah, I mean, Publishers Marketplace, it's worth the investment for the research. A lot of the place to look is in the books that you love. Looking in the acknowledgments and seeing who the agents are back there, and seeing if they do a similar kind of work that you feel like an affinity, an identification with, and I would say reach out to them and say why.
Oh, and I remember that aside from the proposal and the clips, that we also got advanced blurbs. And you said that sometimes if you, if you've studied with somebody or there's somebody in your field who can give you an endorsement for your book, that's a good thing to tell an agent, right?
Sure, yeah. If you have, the more you have in hand, the better.
Good. Kim, what kind of mistakes are people making when they're submitting work to you?
Well, I guess one of the things is Liza mentioned, the lead is so important. We get so many queries. We do read them all, so I mean, or somebody does, like looks at them. No, really. So I think that's good to know for a writer. Someone is really looking at your work that you're sending and considering it. But if you start off with, I've never been published, but, or my name is not provocative enough, or,
though I've never heard of your agency before.
I've never heard of your agency, or I'm not so good at this, but I've written this sci-fi fantasy, which we don't do at all. Stuff like that, like, kind of finding the right agent for the right project and shows that you've done your homework. But Sue talks a lot about having a hook, and I think that if you're writing, for instance, nonfiction, one, you don't say, I have no platform, but take a chance on me or something, really try and build some kind of a platform. It's really
publishing one piece starts getting, that's your platform.
Yeah, definitely. And finding a hook, just the fact that you're kind of like, I drove cross country with my husband. Like, here's the story. Wacky things happen. Characters we met. That doesn't sound like an arc to me. And it's so important to package your material in some kind of a hook that, if you do get on Publishers Marketplace, which is a great tool for writers, if you can kind of whittle your pitch down to an exciting, log line or a great first. You should practically work as much on that first line as you do on the first half.
Yeah, by the way, even with essays, we talk about how what's the Hollywood movie pitch of your essay, and it was funny because I remember I would bring the pieces to the writing group when I was trying for Dan, and they would hate everything. I think I had 12 rejections before I got one. And I remember when I came up with the tagline, which was, after 13 years of marriage, my husband decided to move in with me, and everyone was like, that I want to read. And it was so funny, but the minute that I got, what's the story, and if somebody's interested in the story, that was good. So you want people, before they come to you, it helps you if you could see that in the cover letter, so you get a sense of what the story is.
Absolutely, a beginning, middle, and an end. And I know that people are on Facebook and Twitter, and everyone's like, oh, you're so funny or whatever. But you really have to don't overblow your own experience. I know you think it's really funny, or your friends think it's really funny, but for the world, it has to be packaged in that way.
And also, if you don't mind, since you're talking about social media, a lot of editors and agents have said to me, if you want to work with me, don't befriend me on Facebook and pitch me that way. So could you?
I'm not on Facebook. No, definitely.
But that's not a good way to. That's not a good way to
don't
do it.
Come
right?
over.
So if you want to,
people have done that.
So don't phone someone if there's an editor and agent. Don't phone them if they don't know you. Don't befriend them on Facebook and pitch them that way. So it sounds like getting somebody's correct email and sending them an appropriate cover letter is the way to go. Professional. So Danielle, you're seeing mostly books that you're sent by agents. But so what are you seeing wrong with the material? If someone's sending you if you're reading through a novel or you're reading through a nonfiction proposal, are there things that you're seeing wrong that young writers, aspiring writers, are doing?
See, now this is awkward because I'm getting the material through agents, so it's just almost. I'm sorry.
Her mic is.
Yeah. Do you want this?
My mic dead?
Yeah. Sorry.
It's a little. Oh wow, that is louder.
I know. Jeez. Maybe I've been screaming all night.
It's a little awkward because I'm getting material through agents that agents have already helped work with an author on. So if I'm having a problem, I might be talking to the agent and saying, geez, I need to see more material about this, or where's the author's platform, or things that are missing. So again, as I said, the first step is often having a good agent who is going to pull together and pitch you in the best possible way. But I would say nonfiction-wise, comp titles that you do is so important. I can't say how many times I get nonfiction proposals where the comp titles are every big book that theirs could potentially.
So you don't want to compare your book to Great Gatsby or to Eat, Pray, Love. You want to find really a similar book in the marketplace that sort of mid-level that that it's like, right?
And be realistic. Yeah, don't really overblow those kinds of things or put things in your platform that aren't really true. That again, in this world of social media, sometimes I check up on stuff that comes in through agents' letters or in material and find out very quickly that X or Y was really a bit of a stretch. So you don't want to do stuff like that either, because that turns an editor off right away, and we may not even go to our publisher with it, or our publisher will get completely turned off by something like that as well. So just being really honest in the material that you're sharing, and as other people have said too, really. I wouldn't say workshopping it, because sometimes we can get that feeling that something has been workshopped a little too much, but definitely having other people whose judgment you value and who you think helps your writing get better, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Don't just be like, my mom likes it, my neighbor likes it, my friend likes it, my so-and-so likes it. No, somebody who actually, has some expertise in the area of writing that you've given it to, who's read, who's given you comments that you've actually incorporated and you're open to revise it. Because that's one of the first things. If I'm interested in something, I will ask the agent, how open is the author to revising? Did the author revise with you on this? And then I may, speak to the author as well.
Great, and Kenan, you and I talk about sometimes with you being very impatient and getting really pissed off at rejections. And so, is there a way that you're trying to have a better perspective and being a little more impatient? I remember the piece that you sent that you got really upset about the rejection. You want to tell the story?
Which piece?
With David Lemon.
I think it's the third piece. I sent to, I had an idea. Susan said, what do you want to send? I'm like, I'll just send it to New Yorker, shoot for the stars. And sent it to David Remnick. And 2 years ago, I had no idea who this guy was. And so he wrote me an email within 20 minutes. Beautiful piece. However, we already had someone on staff who wrote about Bosnia, a similar essay a week ago.
Yeah, and he was so mad. He's like, I got a rejection. He rejected it. I'm so mad. And I'm like, he emailed you back in 20 minutes?
So I came to a book party for someone, and I'm sitting on the couch, annoyed. I'm thinking, where can I have this published? And your friend came over and said, David Remnick emailed you? And I said, yeah, who's this David Remnick guy? Everyone talks about David Remnick. And she said, I actually worked with the guy, and I came in having to have lunch, and he actually emailed you back. But anyway, as Susan mentioned before, in publishing, no never means no. It doesn't mean you should stalk the editor, Dan, for example. Don't stalk him. Rework it, take advice from others, be totally open. You have to be vulnerable, extremely vulnerable.
And so you got the one piece, so you had 11 rejections, and then on the 12th try...
Well, that was the Marshall Theater in Queens.
Yeah,
but
so in the 12th try you got it.
But the one I couldn't get in New Yorker actually made it timely, and it was printed in Salon for Memorial Day weekend. So just find another place, make it better, rework it. Don't let it sit on your computer. No.
Good. Okay, so we're going to open this up for questions. So anybody raise your hand if you have any questions. Jane?
I just have to tell Dan how much I enjoyed your essay, Why Men Lie.
The bastard on the couch?
Yeah.
That was Vince Pissarro's essay.
Really?
Yeah.
It was in your book.
It was an anthology, so it was different essays, but he picked
It's a
it.
beautiful piece.
But he picked it.
Never mind.
Great. You had a question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. If you write, is a cover letter the same as a query letter if you've had a book of nonfiction?
Actually, I consider with journalism, a cover letter is if you write an essay, if you finish a whole essay, you write a cover letter explaining what it is, whereas a pitch letter or a query letter in journalism is you haven't written the piece, but you're asking, would you be interested in this piece?
So if you've written the book, you write a cover letter.
Yes, although I guess when you're approaching an agent, I guess it would be a combination of both, because you would be writing a letter saying, I've recently completed this novel about so and so. And by the way, I would start. It was so great seeing you at the Strand panel. You were awesome. I checked out all your books. I bought your book. It was great. I'm working on a novel. I've just completed a novel. Give the 2-line Hollywood movie pitch, maybe 1 sentence about yourself. Could I send it to you? Would you be interested in it? And I'm under the impression a lot of agents might say, let me see the first chapter. Let me see the first 3 chapters. But so you want to boil it down to a letter first. You don't want to send the whole manuscript of a book to editors or agents yet.
You should send it by email rather than snail mail.
These days, I think, does everyone agree email's the best? Yes. Other questions? Yes.
I have a question for Dan, though. When you submit to Modern Love, obviously it's nonfiction, and so let's say you're writing about an
Yeah, good question. So if you're writing about an ex, is Dan going to show it to the ex? Good question.
It's really situation. It depends on the essay. We have a whole variety of ways of dealing with subjects of essays. And the more identifiable the person is, and if it's a divorce, then the person is identifiable. If it's a work relationship, then the person is probably identifiable. But these are all judgment calls of how to handle them. In almost every case where the person can still reach the subject of the essay, we normally ask that they get in touch with that person and let them know about this essay. It's not a matter of a release. It's a matter of courtesy. You're allowed to write about your life. Your life includes other people. People have certain aspects of essays are verifiable, but other parts are not, and people's memories are different. And you know, it's one person's memory and emotion having to do with this experience. But we don't like people to be blindsided, so if we can get in touch with them in advance. Sometimes, it seems like 2 or 3 times a year, maybe not even that often, an essay will be withdrawn by the person because in contacting a subject of an essay, that person will get upset. And if the portrayal is positive, sometimes they get upset. If the portrayal is negative or not as flattering, sometimes the person will still cheer it on and say, all right, I'm going to be in the New York Times. So it's hard to know how people are going to respond. At this point, I mean, I had more problems with this in the early years when I didn't know as well what the job was and how this worked. We don't really have problems like that anymore. I feel like I sort of learned how to handle it. And
in the New York Times, you can't make a fake name. You can't use a fake name. Some publications will let you change names, but not New York Times, Wall Street Journal. Most newspapers won't.
We cannot change names or facts, but we can very artfully remove identifying details so that someone is not exposed more broadly. The person might recognize themselves, but otherwise, no.
Good. Other questions? Yes, Jessica.
So, I have a question for Kirby. If you're an author or trying to sell a book, it's really exciting when any agent shows interest, but I feel like that's a relationship that plays a huge part in selling the book, and it's an ongoing relationship. So what are some tips that you would suggest for picking the right agent for you or for your book?
Good, and Jessica has sold pieces to the New York Times and Salon and Cosmos, so she's getting agents that are interested, but just because an agent is interested in your work doesn't mean that that's the one that you should go with.
How do you date an agent?
Good. How do you decide? How do you figure out which agent?
Well, I mean, you should definitely have, a conversation about the work and their own vision for what they see, and make sure that it's aligned, I think that's whatever your ambitions are, hopefully they are on the same kind of wavelength as you. But I think first and foremost, they kind of have to, first they have to get your work, like kind of just get what you're trying to do. Whether you're trying to be a commercial writer, of narrative, of nonfiction, or a romance writer, or what have you. I think they you have to feel like they get you as a writer. I'm just repeating that.
And it's appropriate to you could get together with an agent, have a meeting.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think you balance passion as well with experience to some degree. Maybe you want somebody about your same age so that you grow together. That's kind of important too.
Do you think that personalities have to mesh significantly well? Because how much time do you really end up spending with each other throughout the course of publishing a book?
I don't know about personalities per se, but I do feel like you should be able to communicate with your agent. And so there's a lot of great agents out there, but I know a lot of writers who have these impressive agents who they're intimidated by, and they have a hard time talking to them and being completely candid about how they feel about this or that. And I don't think that's necessarily the most constructive situation,
Good. Any final questions? Yes, Janet.
To follow up, do you pitch an agent one at a time?
I'm under the impression you're allowed to multiple submit. You could send 100 agents, but once they're reading your book, a lot of times an agent will say, is this an exclusive? Am I just reading it or is everyone reading it? Is that correct?
That was for right now.
It's okay if someone multiple submits.
Yeah, of course, you could definitely multiple submit your initial query, your initial pitch. But yeah, once an agent requests your full manuscript, let's say, or a partial manuscript, and they'll ask often, am I reading this exclusively? Am I reading along with other editors? And if they're reading it, if they're reading it exclusively, then they expect that no one else is reading it. So.
Good. Yes.
Hi. I wanted to know from the authors what the pluses and minuses, or if there are any minuses to an MFA program. I understand you want to study with someone. I understand the structure is good, having the time to write. But for somebody who is published, middle-aged, unsure, is there a reason to go or not go?
Yeah, what did you, Liza, what do you think?
Well, I had kind of an unusual situation in that my first book was already coming out, and then I decided to go specifically for nonfiction for two reasons: to write this book and because I wanted to teach, and an MFA will make you more competitive in the job market for college level teaching creative writing courses. So that was a specific goal I had in mind. So I think it's helpful in that sense. And having the pressure off of having already, I had an agent. It wasn't a hustle as much for looking for agents, trying to get clips. All of that was it was more about just solely working on craft and working towards this degree and getting the teaching experience. So for those reasons, I feel like it was really beneficial, and I'm glad that I went.
Tim, did you say that getting the MFA led you to being an agent?
It actually did, yes. So it helped in that way. I met someone who was an agent, and she thought I'd love it, so she suggested that I, contact this agency. And I think for me, it was a lot about, I learned a lot about writing, but it was a lot about the networking and also, and who I met. And also that informs a lot of my critiquing and editing of manuscripts when I get them.
Yeah, I have an MFA, and I teach in a bunch of MFA programs and do seminars, and what I usually say to people is, don't leave your day job, and if you could do it, I did mine at night. I had a full-time job by day. I did it at night, and keep your expectations, keep your expectations in check, because it's not going to change your whole life. And also be very goal-oriented. If you have one book and you say, okay, if I'm going to do this program, I could do it in a year and a half at night, and I'm going to come out with a completed manuscript, that's a smart way to do it. And if you don't leave your day job, if it doesn't sell, then it doesn't ruin your life. But so you look at it like, I'm going to immerse myself in something I absolutely love, and I'm going to meet great, at the New School in NYU and Columbia, in CUNY, they have awesome teachers. So if you look at it as this is a present I'm giving myself, because I love doing this, but, like I said, but keep a day job. And I teach, my husband and I both teach by day. We actually write by day and teach by night, and that's a good combination. The mistake I see a lot of people make is they quit a full-time job to do an MFA program with stars in their eyes, thinking, okay, when I come out of this, I'm going to get $200,000 book deal, and it's going to change my life. And then I think that ruins, that's not a good idea.
No.
Great. Any final questions? I think we have time for one more. Anybody? Jessica, one more.
Okay, so as far as the Marriage Act, I feel like there was a lot of information in that book about other people that was kind of not damning, but dangerous, because you're writing about something that is illegal. What steps did you take to kind of protect your ex-husband or anybody else in that book that could have, been penalized for things you were?
Yeah, I definitely had him read it, and besides, he's a writer as well, so he gave me excellent story notes, but he also asked for certain details and identifying things to be changed, and so I respected his wishes in every way when it came to that. But also, we came up with our two kind of defenses in that way were that the whole argument that I'm trying to make in the book is that, well, it wasn't illegal, or who's really to say, who can make that call? And then the last-ditch effort in case, something went terribly awry was just to say that I was a James Fryette, and we were legitimately married with sex and everything, and I've made it all up for controversy.
Great. Anyway,
so who really knows what goes on behind closed
doors? So thank you guys for coming. Let's thank these awesome panelists.